ICQ Podcast Episode 364, Tackling RFI and IRU Conference Feedback. Well, hello and welcome, fellow amateur ham radio enthusiasts, to this our 364th episode of the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast. Supported this episode by Winston Lawrence, KD2 Whiskey Lima Lima, Theodore Langdon, KU9 Charlie Papa Delta, and of course our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M1MRB is joined by Chris, Mike Zero Tango Charlie Hotel, Martin, Mike Zero Sierra Golf Lima, Frank, Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel, and Bill, Whiskey Charlie 3 Bravo, to discuss the latest amateur ham radio news. Myself, Colin, M6BLY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature, we catch up with the RSGB, covering topics including Tackling RFI, the IRU Region 1 conference feedback, training, and the second year of virtual conferencing. Well, your ICQ Amateur Ham Radio podcast is advert free and is able to be provided that way due to the very kind donations that you, our listeners, make to us. This episode, we'd like to thank Winston, KD2 Whiskey Lima Lima, and he said, he came in touch with us with not only thanks for the show, but also some technical feedback for us as well, which we took on board. So thanks a lot, Winston, for sending that over. We do appreciate it. Theodore Langdon, KU9 Charlie Papa Delta, set up a subscription donation, and he's just a very simple message. Thanks to you and the rest of the team for having a good podcast. So you're more than welcome, Theodore, and I hope you continue to enjoy, the show that we produce. Now, getting involved and supporting your amateur radio podcast is very, very simple. We use the value for value model. It's a very, very simple concept. You listen to the show. Hopefully you get some enjoyment from it. You can then turn that into a monetary value, say the price of a cup of coffee, a theatre ticket, newspaper, whatever it be, and visit icqpodcast.com/donate and say turn that value you receive from the show into a monetary figure and send it our way. And then say everything that's sent our way goes to either paying our costs or helping to improve the show. So you'll certainly be helping us to continue the show, certainly well beyond the 13 years we've done so already. Right, well, now we're going to catch up with Chris, Martin, Frank, Bill, and the other Martin. I nearly forgot you for a second, Martin. Sorry about that. As they discuss and generate thoughts on the latest amateur ham radio news, including looking for volunteers to investigate interference problems, and also payphone users and how we're going to protect those boxes and their link to amateur radio. As always, hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to the ICQ Podcast News Roundtable for episode 364. And tonight I'm joined by Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH. Hi, Chris.
Good evening, glad to be here. Evening, guys.
Yeah, great to have you again. Also, usually tries to get me into trouble is Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL, and you ain't got Leslie this time.
I don't even need to try. Come on, mate. You know you can get yourself in as much trouble without me. Now, we've not got Leslie, but, he's here in spirit. We've got the soundboard. I'm not going to play it because that's for a completely different podcast, but we all know what they say.
We certainly do.
And we miss you, Leslie.
We do. Moving to the other side of the pond, I have Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH. Hi, Frank.
Good evening, Martin. Glad to be here because Leslie's not, and I miss him, and so we're going to give our honorific greeting, Bill.
Yeah. Well, hopefully Leslie will be shortly. His company's messing him around a bit on shifts, so as soon as he gets himself sorted, we'll fit him in wherever need be. So that's good. And last but not least, Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B. Good evening.
Good evening, everybody. Being that I'm like 6 or 7 weeks ahead of Leslie on the elbow healing, I can assure him that it does get better, but boy, does it take a long time.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Say if you... And unfortunately, guys, as we all get that little bit older, we don't heal quite as quickly as you would when you were, say, a teenager. But I know when I fell off the ladder about 2 years ago, it took me ages to heal. But yeah, that's another story. Okay, well, let's start with our first news story. Volunteers needed to investigate interference problems. Now, this is the RSGB, and they're asking for volunteers to help them join to track down some of these interferences. And volunteering can be very rewarding, especially if it's something you're really interested in. So let's go with Chris. What do you think, Chris?
I think, and especially when we come on to our next story, this is interesting. I think one of the RSGB and national societies do provide a useful service, and one of them is around helping members to with EMC issues. So it's great that they're asking for volunteers to help people, perhaps help people out that are perhaps a little bit less experienced in helping to figure things out. Perhaps help out other amateurs in terms of fixing some of those problems. So I think it's good. I think it's useful. I think it's the sort of thing that the RSGB are good at and will continue to do.
Yeah, certainly is. And I've interviewed the RSGB for this episode, and they've got more to say about this, obviously, at the end. But this is our feelings on this one. Morning. You got thoughts on interference and volunteering?
Interference in the world of power line transmission, unregulated imports, China electronic. I mean, come on. Seriously, I refuse to believe we've got an interference problem anywhere in any form of RF at all, let alone people putting PLT and devices off the shelf. I think it can only be a good thing. The RSGBs are asking for volunteers to help out. This is the time to get involved and to help out if you possibly can. I'm sure there's lots of information, lots of different ways that you can get involved. We all know the noise floor is going up wherever you are using radio, whether you're using HF, whether you're going up to VHF, UHF. We all know that the bands are getting crowded. I'm sitting here, I use like wireless mics and stuff all the time for work, and even up there, we get interference and stuff. So it's great to see the RSGB getting out there and trying to get rid of some of this interference, long term, to try and lower the noise floor. Get involved. Your national body can only help you if you help them.
Yeah, dead right with that, Martin. Dead right. And the more we help, it's as much as anything, it's our hobby. You just can't sit back and go, it's somebody else's problem.
Exactly. And like the RSGB, they've only got limited resources. They've got great resources, but they are limited. And, if we're sitting here with our equipment, we can sit and we can listen for this noise. We can try and pinpoint it. We can provide that information to them however they want it, and then they're in the position that they can lobby Ofcom or whoever to sort it.
Certainly agree on that one. So, moving the other side of the pond then, Frank, I know this isn't a UK thing, but do you think this would be useful or happens over your side of the pond?
Well, I think it's going to be useful in the United Kingdom, and I think it will also be very useful in the U.S. So I'm very, very positive, and I want to focus on one part of the story. It said we need relevant authorities to become aware by taking measurements and surveying any available documents and reports. Let's distinguish that from a generic helpline. You contact them, I've got some kind of noise, help me figure out what it is. Now, that's incredibly useful. Here on this side of the pond, ARL does a good bit of that, and Bill can follow up as well. Ed Hare in the lab at ARL has considerable expertise in this area. It's more of the second thing where you've got a helpline, whether it's by email or telephone call or what have you. What this is doing that I think is very significant is it follows the lead of DARC in Germany, who has sort of gotten out there and gotten ahead with their electrical noise area measurement system, or ENAM. They have developed a box, for lack of a more descriptive thing. They have 55 receivers that can scan from 50 kilohertz to 31 megahertz. They're using the Red Pataya SDR. And I've actually talked to the person over there in Germany who is sort of honchoing that. Now, I hope that RSGB, which I'm a member, is going to go toward that route. You've got a smaller area to monitor in the United Kingdom like it is in Germany versus, say, the U.S., but I think by taking those measurements, it's going to counteract what industry does with their lobbying efforts to tell regulators, Ofcom, whoever it is, hey, don't throttle us back. We're engaged in jobs creation and we're trying to make profits, and all the things that Martin Rothwell kind of laid out there in front of us. We have increased over the last 30 years with microelectronics to an extent I don't think anybody could have predicted, and they all have noise contributions of some type. So I say bravo. I hope they move forward with it, and I would hope that the ARL would follow suit at some point.
You're dead right on the everything has noise, Frank, and it'd be good to see the IRA certainly do something similar. Everything we've got, and since about the 70s, everything we've got, electronics has an oscillator in it, pretty much, and anything with an oscillator is radiating. So computers, even our watches we walk around with. So there's background noise, so much of it now, it's quite phenomenal. Bill, what's your thoughts on this one?
Tailoring on to that, the whole thing with the consumer electronics, it's like light bulbs anymore, depending on how they're manufactured and to what specifications. I got a couple compact fluorescent lights I had to replace because I just couldn't make them stop generating noise. LED wise, I only found one of them, so that's kind of reassuring. And the tagline on the leaflets about EMC matters is absolutely the truth. You have a lot of VDSL interference over there because of using copper for the last mile. You have there's wireless chargers now that are basically large transmitters. You pull a car over and it wirelessly charges. These things are only going to get worse. And as said earlier, there's less and less people to actually investigate and mitigate these EMC threats. So I'm really happy they're doing a committee. And Frank, I thought there was an EMC task force at ARRL, but I can't find it now. Maybe
you may be right, Bill. You may be right.
Yeah.
I'm just going on. I haven't seen anything.
Well, once again, it's like everything else. It's tricky. You have to be dead on when you go with these cases and stuff. Yeah, they have it's the RFI group. I keep thinking because we had a power or internet over power line,
right.
Broadband over power line. I think that's the name of it, broadband over power line test area about an hour and a half from here. And I just remember that it was horrible, horrible, horrible issues. And they ended up putting in so many notch filters. When was that? It had to have been, Frank, late 90s, early 2000s?
Yeah. And pretty much they tried to beat back BPL, but now you've got the new authorization of money for rural broadband. And, of course, all of the electric associations out in rural America have ponied up to try to do that. So we will lose by sheer force of numbers and politics to try to beat that back. Bill, my comments were, is the ARL committee and group trying to do what the DARC is doing and what I hope RSGB will do, create these boxes so we can get actual measurements? Because my comment was predicated on until we present scientifically measured data, we're going to get out lobbied.
Absolutely 100% true. And just tailoring on that one thing, I'm aware of 2 electric cooperatives that are northwest of me, and they're running fiber. They are not attempting to do BPL. They're actually, because they own the poles to everyone's house, they're running fiber optic cable, and this blows my mind. This is something Martin will find this hilarious. Today, 2021, apparently single mode fiber outdoor jacketed use is cheaper than copper. The future is now, guys.
Oh yeah, but copper's gone right through the roof in price. So yeah, you're dead right. It probably is cheaper. What I was thinking of, and this is just me throwing something into the mix, and maybe I ought to talk to the RSGB about this. I used to drive Carol's car occasionally. It's now become my car after I wrote the other one off, and she's got the newer one. No problems with that. But there used to be a drop-in charger that Carol had in it. And every time I got in the car, I used to unplug the damn thing because it used to wipe out the 2-meter calling frequency. Now, I'm just thinking, if we're going to set up an EMC or do EMC stuff, would it be an interesting project for somebody, and I'm not volunteering for this because I've got far too much on the go, but as us amateurs find devices like that charger that I had that filed under B1N now, should we not set up a database of this model causes this interference, this model causes that interference, or whatever? And it can be all sorts of devices. And I wonder if that's worth doing. I'll throw it open to you guys.
Do you know, it's funny you should say that about that charger. I had the exact same problem with an iPod. Sorry, a generic MP3 player. It was a 160 gig MP3 player that had a hard disk in it, and I used to use it in my car, had it connected to the stereo, and there was just a carrier, constant carrier, just going on 145/500, the UK, the 2-meter calling frequency. And it was bothering me so much. And I turned this generic MP3 player off, and the interference went away. I thought, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. And it wasn't even charging, it was just playing. Now, okay, that's going back 10, 15 years, but it's interesting that it was generating a tone specifically on that frequency. And I wonder why. Because, either way, it didn't make any difference.
I had a very similar experience with the set. I think it was actually when I had a MP3 player of a certain brand. And I think when I played with this, I think it was actually when the display came on, I was getting the interference, but it was exactly on the 2-meter calling frequency. It was very strange.
Yeah, so guys, maybe a database. If you've got new volunteers and somebody who can do database work, I think set up a database and make it available so that people like us can just log devices that cause interference. And if you had enough fields like how far away are you still picking it up, what frequency is it on, and all those sort of things, and don't make it too difficult to start with, at least we could start building a picture of all the problem devices that are out there, and maybe go back to the authorities afterwards to get them. If they've passed legislation and then the person who's making them has taken out half the filtering, that could be half the problem.
Well, that was actually what I was about to say. I mean, we obviously have regulators that can control what can and can't come in. Why is there not people from these regulators anonymously purchasing, one of each of these, products just randomly? Go out there, okay, then this television has passed all of its things. When it came in for test, it had all these filters in. Let's go buy one from a random high street retailer. Let's go buy one from a well-known online retailer. Let's go buy one from that big superstore we see on the main road. Take them apart and say, well, actually, and don't always go to the same one. Just see, actually, how much of them have still got those filters in? Why are these people not doing that?
Don't know, Mark.
I think because no one's forcing them to. That they would have to voluntarily do that, and if that's not part of their mandate to do it, or that's not part of their, it's like saying, "What, you do extra work, Martin? Can you go and do it?" It's like, well, no, not necessarily. On the subject of a database, Martin, I think the only barrier there might be the risk of litigation. If companies didn't like that, and they've got a big legal team, that might be a problem.
Well, it was just an idea to throw into the mix, so let's say, interesting story worth discussing, I think, on that one.
I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it may be a way of maybe reporting issues and see if other folks have got having the same issue, I suppose. Yeah, not a bad idea.
Right, moving to our next news story. The October 2021 Volunteer Monitor Program report is out, and that's something that happens in the States via the ARRL. Frank, you know a lot about this, so I'll pass it to you first.
Okay, thanks, Martin. The report for October from Riley Hollingsworth, who K4 is ZDH, who's the coordinator of that and a former FCC legal counsel for the Enforcement Bureau. I won't go into many of the details, but I think it shows a bit of activity. I'm involved with supporting that, and there are about 200 participants in the volunteer monitoring program, and they're asked to give at least 20 hours of listening time per month. So that's about 4,000 hours that they're listening. And it uses at times some sophisticated technology, and it's evaluating remote receivers and things like that to try to cover some of these things. And you'll see a various thing from advisory notices for somebody just not giving their call sign, like forever. It's not a stopwatch thing. And as Riley has told the volunteer monitors, we're not the band police. We're not the cops, but we are there to assist the FCC Enforcement Bureau to investigate certain activities. So they're out there listening. And the thing that's important here is that it's a frequent activity for the FCC to approach the volunteer monitor program and saying, look, we've had some independent reports of X, Y, and Z. Can you guys get on it? And Riley's put together a team that will then focus on that problem. And that has pretty much gotten to the root of the matter. So I'll let some others comment, about the specifics. But again, there were quite a bit of activity. One challenge is HF versus repeaters. It's a little easier to monitor a broader area of HF than it is repeaters, but certainly both are being done, and both have been there. I've been pleased with how this program is maturing. We've had a change in ARL leadership with Dan Henderson's retirement, and we've got another person there whom Riley has worked with for a long time. And I think it's about to move more into the use of technology to help us monitor this. So I think it's a story that indicates how much activity is being volunteered, for this particular program.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I want to ask Martin to go next because, interference and people doing what they shouldn't do, we have experience of that in the UK, and Martin's a repeater keeper. But it's part of this a re-education process, I wonder. What do you think, Martin?
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to get a few bad eggs that do what they shouldn't do. Either because they're genuinely they're uneducated from the point of view of what they're allowed to do, or they've forgotten what they were told. You quite often see you hear questions and things on social media and like, hey, can I do this? And everyone jumps on them and attacks them and basically just go and read your license. That's the easy way to not get attacked on social media. But we do have people that are doing the wrong thing. There's no excuses for playing music and stuff like that. That's just you being stupid and rebroadcasting stuff. We know that stuff gets rebroadcast and shouldn't do, and we know who does it. We just, that's a whole other story. But, I don't think there's anything like that over here. Certainly if there was, I don't think that they would have necessarily the backing of Ofcom or anyone that could do anything about it. I don't know on that for sure. But I think you'd have to very much lobby Ofcom to do anything about it. Reading the interesting story, though, they refer to someone operating out of band at 7.138. Well, that's in band for us. So I'm curious what's there. They say technician operators in one place received advisory notices after making numerous FT8 contacts on 40 and 20 meters. And they refer to like technicians not allowed to use data on 40 meters and not allowed anything on 20 meters. He said, well, I'd argue FT8, you know, it's the computer making the content, not you. Sorry, being cheeky there. One individual, his case will be referred to the FCC for further enforcement action, which could include removal of voice privilege from or revocation of his general class license. And my thought to
be
that,
at 7,200, Martin, here in the States for general class.
Okay, so but they're saying we're going to potentially revoke his license if the guy's doing something he shouldn't be. If he's out of band, yep, taking away his license, that's really going to help him. If he's not operating within the terms of his license anyway, I don't think that's going to make much difference. But it's interesting that there are volunteer monitor programs out there, and that the FCC are working with them. I want to know more on this. I think.
Well, let me give you more on that one, because I'm aware of it. That's not the first time. If you read the story carefully, he had previously received an advisory notice, and he kept doing it.
The other thing, Martin, is that in the States, they operate a different licensing system to us. So whereas if you're a foundation license holder, for argument's sake, in the UK, you get the whole of the 40-meter band. Now, guys from the States, I passed my exam out 10 years ago. I would have to look at your band plan, but I do know that only certain license holders have access to certain frequencies. So you might be a technician or a general, but that doesn't necessarily give you the whole band of amateur frequencies in that, say, 40-meter band or 20-meter band or whatever.
Yeah.
So that almost sounds like he's just misread his band plan and doesn't understand where he's operating then. But I guess if you've had an advisory notice, you've been told, you would think to be a bit more careful.
And Martin, I prefer you call them lowly generals, because that's what I call myself.
No, Frank, you're winding me up.
Just teasing.
I know you are, but I work on the principle that everybody who's got a license has as much right as anybody else. And I'm going to be open here. I've met some full licensees that I'm thinking, my God, how did you ever get a license? And I've met some...
Dude, I'm right here. Come on.
Oh, I know. No, and I've met some foundation license holders that are really clued up.
Yeah.
So, and we're all guilty. I mean, we're all guilty every time. But when I came out of Dayton, I had to reread the licensing conditions for the States because I hadn't operated out there before. I hold an extra class license out in the States, and I didn't. Which frequency do I want? And Bill sent me over the band plan, which was very, very useful. So, it's we have to. If you go abroad or even in your own country, you have to understand where you are allowed to work.
Martin, one thing that the ARL does, and I think maybe ICOM sponsors it, or they have one that's separate. They have a really nice detailed band plan that's color coded. So I respect what Martin is saying, and maybe the person didn't understand, but there are these tools that, are there to help you. And in this particular case, it had been a repeated, not just once, and you got to notice, oops, I did it again, to quote Britney Spears. No, he did it a bunch of times. So.
Yeah. He's needed serious talking to. Bill, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll agree with what everyone said. I actually have that on my wall. I have the 2012 version of that band plan, looking at it right now. So I find it very interesting that the techs are jumping in the FT8, which is cool. Looking at the band plan, they have 28 to 28.300 that they're allowed to use data on 10 meters, data in CW. But the technicians, they have a small slice on 80 meters, CW only, 3.525 to 3.6, 40 meters, 7.025 to 7.125. So they get to enjoy the WinLink stations blasting over them as they're trying to send slow CW. and 15 meters, 21.025 to 21.200. So there, whoever posted the photo in the chat, that was funny. But anyway, yeah, it's CW only. This is a hangover from incentive licensing, I guess, from years ago. And that's one of the proposals that the FCC put in addition to giving them some voice access on HF, was to change these bands that they have from being CW only to CW and narrow data, narrow data. I think that's what the words they used in that proposal was. They wanted that sub 500 hertz data signals, and that would let them use FT8 and FT4. And it's an interesting proposal, but it's still sitting in the FCC dustbin box of nothingness, not moving forward, which is some days seems pretty standard. But overall, I think this, if you really look at the old predecessor program to this, which was the official observers, I think this program with the volunteer monitors, to me, not having seen very much data out of the old program, it seems like this one they're spending a lot more time, and they're doing a lot more corrective actions without escalating to the FCC. So that part I kind of like that. I like the fact that they're working with people and trying to get them to do the right thing.
I agree with you, Bill. I think that, as I've said before, it's our hobby. We need to all take an active role in it. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, well, I guess from over here, from our perspective, we were sort of surprised to see. I mean, I don't think this is enforcement. This is more reminding, isn't it? I think there's been a little bit of enforcement. This is more just reminding people to use the call sign, to use the right part of the band, and where people have, are serial offenders, maybe then looking to do enforcement. But I mean, compare this to the UK. I mean, we have nothing like this at all. Our regulator doesn't really seem to take complaints in the amateur radio spectrum particularly seriously. I think we checked a while ago, and I think there've been something like 0 prosecutions in this country for amateur radio violations. So, it's kind of good to see that at least it's taken seriously, in the States.
Oh yeah, that's good. Right, let's move to our next news story, and a calling for all payphone users that there are thousands of payphone boxes set to be taken out of service, and I suppose, what was it you called it in the States, Chris? Pay booths, was it?
Phone booth, I think. I'm sure Bill or Frank can correct us.
Yeah, no, it's phone booth.
Yeah, phone booth. Now, everybody seems to have a mobile phone these days and one thing or another, but there are a lot of places in the UK, and I live in Surrey, which is one of the heavily populated areas of the UK, and there are lots of places where the mobile phone doesn't work. In bigger countries like the States, I would imagine you'd have even bigger problems. So having phone booths or phone boxes, as we call them, I think is quite important. Mine, what's your thoughts?
Well, you mentioned about like normal phones not working, but even the places that where you have massive gaps in coverage, and there are so many of them, even going around London. You look around and there's no phone boxes there either, because they've still got to get the cables to them. In fact, one of my colleagues, we were working in Leicester Square, right in the centre of. They're probably Leicester Square is almost like slap bang in the centre of London, and one of my colleagues is there. He's got a phone, his brand new phone. And bear in mind, all of our 4 networks here, they all claim to be number one. You can't all be number one in the same market. Just saying that, but he's got one. Again, they claim to be number one. He says, "I've got no signal here. I can't get an outbound call." I'm like, "Well, yeah, but my phone on a different network was working." So it's strange how that works. But I do wonder how many people still use a phone box. And if you looked at some of the data, I bet. In particular with international roaming, and I know that there is potentially some changes coming through international roaming in the UK for reasons that we won't mention on this podcast, but I bet a lot of the calls that are made from public phone boxes are most likely emergency calls where people have there's an emergency going on and people just, there's a phone box there, grab that phone, dial 999. It's probably easier as well to use a phone for that purpose, because if you've got an emergency situation, your adrenaline's pumping, it can be hard enough to unlock your phone, let alone work out how to dial a number and hit call. Whereas, a phone with physical buttons, it's easier to do it. But I couldn't tell you where my nearest phone box to here is. I wouldn't have a clue. And I think the last phone boxes I've seen and actually noticed, the last time I thought, there's a phone box, they just had cards in them advertising services, shall we say. So the fact that they're trying to protect them, great. But I think, if anything, really, they should be looking to put at least one at the end of each town centre or something like that, just so that they are there. But I can't see British Telecom doing that. But of course, if they were to go, where would Superman get changed, and then where would we be?
Well, there you go. That's a good one. Well, the last place I worked where there was a regular phone box was at a railway station, which was out in the wilds of nowhere. There was hardly any buildings. I think the nearest neighbour was like about 200 metres away, and there was a phone box there, and the station master arrived there at 6:30 one morning to find a gentleman from Afghanistan asleep in the box. Now, he said he had broken English. He said he was from Afghanistan. When he was woken up, he disappeared very quickly, and according to the station manager, he looked like he'd arrived in the country somewhat dishevelled. So whether he was a legal immigrant or not, I don't know, but he disappeared quickly.
So, Martin, I found an article on BBC News from about a week ago, so I think it's probably links to the same story. So, according to the BBC, 96% of UK adults now have a mobile phone. So that's 4% don't have a phone, about UK adult mobile phone. So that's a pretty significant number. So what BT have announced is that they're going to return phone boxes in the following criteria. So if it's located into an accident or suicide hotspot, if there's been more than 52 calls made from it in the last 12 months, if there are exceptional circumstances meaning the need for a public call box, or this is an important one, if the location is not covered by all 4 mobile phone networks. I presume that's the 4 main networks in the UK. So,
does that mean they're putting loads more in London then?
I don't know. The ones I can remember, the ones that stick out in my mind, are the ones that sit in Parliament Square near to the Houses of Parliament. I think that's probably for the photo opportunity. I've noticed a lot of them nowadays, and I think what you can do is to kind of sponsor a phone box or repurpose ones. I think I've seen quite a few now at libraries, especially in kind of remote locations where people put books in them. Or another one is where you'll see defibrillators in them. So you might have a village somewhere and they take the phone and stuff out of it, and then they repurpose it as a place to have a defibrillator. So if someone has a cardiac arrest, that's they can go and grab it from there. So I think there are some benefits going forward, but maybe not as a phone, having a phone in there.
They have defibs in some of them, and I think there's been a few have been turned into libraries as well. So they keep the box, but just take the telephone out of it. That's
right. So have the books in there, and I think they tend to be where I've been, sort of in the countryside, where you got villages where there's maybe a phone box there. That they can. Of course, there's the classic red telephone box, and I'm sure someone will tell me what they're called, a certain code or something. Yeah. And then you've got the sort of new ones that are made out of glass. I think the classic red telephone box are the ones that people like to see. But I mean, I remember when I first came down south, down to London in the early 1990s, when mobile phones weren't quite as popular, and there were lots and lots of. In fact, there were companies putting in phone boxes at the time, and not just BT, but other companies. And of course, as soon as mobile phones started taking off in the sort of maybe the mid 90s, they all kind of fell into disrepair, and some of these companies that were putting them in, went out of business, leaving the phone boxes just to be left really, and kind of, I guess, get vandalised and just be an eyesore. So I know that quite a few of those are taken out, but this is an interesting story.
Actually, there is something. Just thinking about this, I just had a quick look on Street View from my work. And there is actually a phone box just around the corner from I've never paid too much attention to it, but thinking about it, I have seen it, and there is a little aerial on the top of it suggesting that it might actually run via a mobile phone network more than anything else. But it's funny you mentioned defibs. I did read somewhere that BT might actually sponsor the power to keep them charged. I had that in my mind. They did that. I read that somewhere recently in the last couple of weeks. So,
okay, I think it depends on the model. I think a lot of defibs have got like an internal battery pack that has to be changed ever so often. But in fact, I've just done a Street View check myself, and there is actually a phone box not too far from me as well. So there are a few out there. Whether it's going to stay or not, I don't know. But I mean, obviously, it does cost them money to maintain. You can see why they want to sort of downsize the estate because, if they break down, someone's going to go and fix them. They've got to go and collect the money out of them. People steal the money out of them, especially some of the ones in some of the remote locations. So I can see why they're a real pain. But I think there are some criteria, and that's the ones I think that they've identified where they're actually, quite an important asset.
I want to keep your phone box, go and make 52 phone calls.
Exactly.
Seems to be problem sorted. So,
well, there you go. That's a good one. So move the other side of the pond. Bill, do you guys have many phone booths, and are they starting to take them out in your part of the world?
They've been disappearing around here for decades. I'm sure there's still some around. I just don't even notice them because I'm in a strange area that, you drive 15 minutes north or south off the interstate and you may not have cell phone coverage. It's, it's a reality. I do know that up where the mother-in-law lives in Bradford County, one place I went for dinner a couple weeks ago had a payphone because I parked right next to it. And actually there's actually two of them there, but it's the same deal. I mean, I think establishing a metric for usage is pretty fair. And a lot of areas right now, I mean, even if like your copper lines go out around here and you want regular plain old telephone service over copper, they actually a lot of times just put a cell phone hotspot in with a converter on it and just hook you up that way because the copper lines around here at least are basically unmaintainable.
Right. So, looks like the old payphone booth or payphone box is going to be a thing of the past. Probably if we ever do this again in 10 years' time, they probably won't exist. But it's something that when we see the old pictures, guys, I think most of us will remember them. Hi. Okay. Frank, I didn't want to cut you out on this one. What do you think?
Oh, no, I agree with Bill and Martin. I cannot, in my head, even say where there's a phone booth, as we call them here. And in urban areas, there may be more of them. In poorer areas of town, that's just an impression. But no, they are going in. Many of them have had the receiver ripped out, So it's, they're not functional.
Yeah, that's always the way, isn't it? People rip them apart on one thing or another. I believe the earphones or the handsets were quite useful in the UK for making things with. Not that I ever did it, and that's the truth. But there you go. Right, move to our next news story. Alike, but not alike. That sounds a bit strange to me. But it was talking about broadcast versus ham radio. There's a gentleman called Mike Pearson, W0MH, and he wrote about his experiences in amateur radio, and he's actually a broadcast engineer. Now, you probably closer to George Thomas, who's a broadcast engineer, than most of us. Frank, do you want to go first?
Yes, he lives about 3 miles from me, actually. George, W5JDX, well known for his appearance with Smoke and Solder on Ham Nation. Lesser known, but longer term as the person who started AmateurLogic.tv. George was, I'm not sure if he was just doing independent consulting or what he was doing, but a few years ago, a radio group here in the Jackson, Mississippi area contacted him and wanted to know, did he know anybody who could become their engineer? They had put out want ads and things like that. And he just couldn't find people. And George is now the engineer for, I think, about 6 stations. And he has said as recently as yesterday, I was listening to him on a repeater, and he said, when he and another guy whom I also work with, Jeff Corcoran, W5PBB, when they retire and they are approaching, reasonable retirement age, there's no one else that they know in this area. And it's very hard to import someone. So thinking about radio engineering as we have thought about it over the years is sort of a transitioning thing. This is a neat story. It takes me back to being 19 or 20 years of age, and I developed an FM broadcast station, a mighty 10 watts WXGC, at the college I was a student at. And then as I was getting ready to graduate, a local group got tired of paying advertising rates because there was only one commercial station in town. So they decided to build one. They asked me to kind of help them do that. And so I was involved in the building of WXLX 1060 AM, 1,000 watt daytime only, and did all of it for 2 stations. So going through the preparation of the application, hiring someone then in a plane to fly over the site, buying mesh grid to go into radios, all the things that we do on a much smaller scale in some ways in amateur radio. And so this is a neat story looking at what you're doing. You're doing one for money, commercial broadcasting. You're doing one for fun and enjoyment, a hobby, yet there's a fair amount of overlap. And I've said this for a long time. If you want to understand propagation, use a small radio, a decent radio, but one with a loop antenna on the AM broadcast band, and listen to sunrise and sunset and midnight when stations, they used to do this more than they do now. Sunday night at midnight, early Monday, they would go off the air for maintenance. You'll learn a lot about propagation simply from medium wave frequencies and listening. So there's a great deal of overlap, and it kind of brought me back to an earlier point in my life, Martin.
Yeah, it sounds interesting, Frank. And let's say this guy's done quite well. Bill, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, echoing what Frank said, it was very common in the past for broadcast engineers to also be licensed amateur radio operators, and now it's not, and that makes me sad a little bit, because that was one of the things that when we would have somebody come in to do station inspections or preventative maintenance on the FM equipment, broadcast equipment, the first thing that they would pretty much notice is, hey, you're a licensed ham radio operator. Let's talk shop. And so that was always fun. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things go in the future, and hopefully that trend will turn around again.
Yeah, I hope so, Bill, because a completely different tangent. Sorry, I'm going off a tangent on this one, but I had my boiler replaced the other week, and British Gas come in to do it. The electrician came in, and I said, "Oh, I've been told you're taking the thermostat off the wall. Can I have the old thermostat?" And he looked at me and he said, "Mate, if you really want one, I'll go and give you one, a brand new one out the van." And I went, "No, you're missing the point. I don't want that one. I want the one on the wall that's worked for 20 years. I want to take it apart and see how well it was made." And I knew how it worked, but I'd never sort of taken them apart and actually had a good look inside. And I was quite impressed because it did have some spark suppression and one thing and another in it. But he had got no idea. This was a qualified electrician, no idea how the thing worked. He said, "Well, how does it actually work?" And I was explaining it to him because nowadays everything is modular. And if we got people that just know how to change the modules, like we had an interference problem in the last episode we were talking about, where somebody unplugged something and plugged something else in, but they don't really know what they're doing, or they have no interest. I mean, surely you have an interest. But that's me getting off on my high horse on that one. On that one, Bill, I agree with you. Now, before we pass it to Martin and he plays one of his jingles, Chris, what do you think?
Well, Martin and I were both, and I'm sure Martin I might beat Martin to this one. We're both lucky enough. I think it was now 4 years ago, believe it or not, when they opened the amateur radio station, BBC Broadcasting House in London.
Yep.
And I know at least 4 amateurs that work for the BBC in broadcasting. So it's not just in the state, and they are, some people are behind the scenes, some are actually, kind of on the air. At least one person I know is on the air that's a licensed amateur. So there's definitely a link between broadcasting and amateur radio. I think it's, I think it's in people's blood, isn't it? I think, people's hobby, some folks, like I say, some folks that I know, some couple that I know pretty well, where it's their hobby and it was also their job. I think they've retired since, but there's definitely a link there. And I think people perhaps start off in the amateur radio hobby, and that sparks something in them, and they want to go and get, it helps them to have the skills to be able to do it, and it may have actually even helped them get a job in broadcasting, and it's something that they're continuing to do, beyond that point. So there's definitely a link there. I'll pass it around to Mr. Rothwell with his jingles.
Do you want a jingle? I can play a jingle if you want. It doesn't surprise me that that there are broadcast radio engineers that are licensed amateurs. I do wonder how many people work for companies like Arkiva, who basically look after like broadcast transmitter networks in the UK. I wonder how many of them are licensed. I know there are some people, certainly on one of the North London repeaters, that often talk about broadcast engineering. So there are certainly some involved with it. I did engineering for a number of RSL radio stations. Basically, RSL is restricted service license. You can apply for a broadcast license for 28 days at a time, up to twice a year. And I did some engineering for a few RSL stations. And one of the key things was that you had to have someone with good RF knowledge available for support. It didn't say you had to be licensed, but you had to understand the technology that you were putting in. And there are other podcasts as well that are specifically relating to radio tech. And they often used to talk to broadcast engineers who would come in and they would talk about what they were working on and things like that. What I'm thinking of, I think it's hosted by Kirk Harnack, and I'm pretty sure he's licensed. He'd often talk to a co-host, Chris Tobin. I think Chris is no longer with us, but he often used to give nods to ham radio stuff that he'd worked on, and I was doing this, but from my ham radio thing, I knew about doing this. So it doesn't surprise me. I do very, very basic broadcast stuff with my main work. I broadcast on the air, but technical wise, I do a little bit of broadcast stuff. But it's the ham radio stuff has really helped me understand things like programming radio microphones, explaining to people why Wi-Fi gets slower the further away from you get from your access point, and how no matter what your broadband company tells you, there are still only 3 frequencies you can use for 2.4 gig wireless, and your neighbors are on them as well. And in fact, it was someone the other day that said to me, we need people like you, because I set up a video to record, put the wireless mics all on the same frequency, because I thought that was what we should probably do, because then that way they'd all work together. And they were completely oblivious that you need 10 microphones. Yeah, you have to have 10 receivers and 10 different frequencies. But yeah, it's helped me a lot, and it doesn't surprise me that broadcast engineers do have nods into the amateur radio world, because let's face it, the two complement each other. And if it's your hobby, you're likely to try and get a job that involves the technology of your hobby, aren't you?
Yes, certainly are. I come very close to getting a job about 10 years ago with a broadcast company in London. Probably shouldn't say who they are, but I got down to the last 3, and I had no broadcast knowledge or broadcast experience, but I was actually holding my own, and to get down from however many to the last 3, got to the second interview for them. So yeah, I felt quite good about that. But that was amateur radio knowledge that helped me with that one, certainly. So all in all, I think the two do actually marry up quite well. And for anybody who's going to become a broadcast engineer, amateur radio is very useful. For anybody who's in amateur radio, maybe you might get a job in broadcasting. I almost did. So it can't be all bad.
What did you say to upset them?
I told them I drank coffee.
Should have said it was beer.
No. In fairness, I think the person they went for had far more broadcast experience. What let me down was actually the experience of working in a broadcast environment rather than understanding the technology. So, I go with them. It was fair. All right, move to the last news story. And I kind of like this one because this is another one of those get out there and do, and another program that's making its way all around the world and everybody's enjoying this. Ireland and India have just joined the Parks on the Air scheme. So, okay, it's another reason to get out and about and have a go at this sort of thing. Bill, what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, when Vance put this out in 3VEM, I was pretty excited because maybe I'll get some DX. Always chasing the DX, but the Parks on the Air program is worldwide, and as they go through this, working with local groups to get their holding my hands up in the air to point to the map, but that doesn't matter. But as they work with local groups to get the parks identified and added to the database, and then people can start using POTA app and go out there and work stations. It's very, very exciting.
Yeah, I think it's exciting because it's another one of those things. Not everybody wants to climb a hilltop or a mountain. Some people are worried about heights. Some people are all sorts of things. Some people might not be as steady on their pins, or have other needs that exclude them from being able to do that. But if you can just tip up at a park with your car and put up an area and operate and enjoy the outside, I think it's pretty fair. What do you reckon, mine?
Well, I sort of read this, and if you're on the list, great. It's an official country, and it's great to be recognised. But I always say, like whether you're on the list, whether you're not on the list, don't let it stop you getting out. Just because your country isn't listed doesn't mean you haven't got any parks. Doesn't mean you can't go out and operate out there. If you want to get out on the air, go out there, do it. Get out, especially if you've got some sunshine or you just want to get out of the house, away from the kids or anything like that. It's a great excuse to go out, but you don't have to be officially recognised. Just get out there, call CQ, and hey, you'll be the one person in that unrecognised country that is operating from a park. And you know what? You might attract some attention from people on the air as well. So just go do it.
Yeah, and the other thing is when you operate portable in sort of public areas like parks, be prepared for people to come across and talk to you and involve them, engage them. This is the time when us amateurs can and should put back into the hobby by explaining what we're doing to people. What do you think, Chris?
It's definitely an opportunity to demonstrate what we do. We used to do it on HMS Belfast, and you and I, Martin, any excuse to talk about the hobby to people, we'll take it. No, I think it's great. Another couple of countries have joined the scheme. It means that they can, or taking on board Martin Moffell's point, you can still do this even if his country isn't part of the scheme. But they can now take part in the awards. They can get plaques and things, or that sort of thing, which is good. I think some folks, going to a park is probably easier than going to up a hill to do something on the air. Maybe some folks aren't quite up for that, but this might be a little bit more appropriate for them. But yeah, get out there and like you say, lots of benefits to being out in the air and operating radios. And I think this is really good. I was actually looking myself. I didn't realise that the UK was actually on. This is my my lack of knowledge. Was the UK was part of Parks on the Air, and there is a map you can look at. And there's an awful lot of parks out there. When I clicked on most of them, they all came up saying never been activated. So there's plenty to go out there, guys. Perhaps something I might do is actually go out there and try and activate some of these parks and see if we can tick some boxes on some on some websites to say that we've a few more parks have been activated.
Yeah, well, that'll be a good one. And I say, I know that it's a all round the world thing, so it does work very well. Frank, last words on this one?
Well, I think it's a good story. The Parks on the Air here in the state kicked off after the National Parks on the Air back a few years ago. I think 2016 might have been that year. And this is sort of an independent thing, but it's just going gangbusters. And I just saw a story on the cover page of QRZ.com that this was another banner month for POTA activation. And my little portable ops team, we've started doing some of these. One thing to keep in mind on POTA versus SOTA, the European SOTA computer system is automated when you submit your logs. So and I've never submit one, but Ed DD5LP has told me about it. So much easier. POTA has a manual system where you have a regional coordinator, and they do it semi-manually. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it's not automated, and that can be a challenge. So I hope that as this grows, they will be able to get the submission process automated. And they don't have all parks on the air. One of the things they do here in the States is they only get those controlled by a state agency of Parks and Wildlife. And Bill, I don't know what you have in Pennsylvania, but here we have many parks that are not controlled by the state wildlife and recreation and fishing, whatever the name might be. We have one, for example, I live on a big lake, a reservoir, and the Pearl River Valley Water District controls a half dozen parks that have numerous hams. In fact, many of the antenna and radio tests that you see by George Thomas when Ray Novak comes to visit here on Amateur Logic are filmed in one of those parks, but yet it would not be included in the Parks on the Air. So it's a program that is exploding and now adding Ireland and India. And I think it's just going to have more demand on the resources. So volunteer to be a coordinator or volunteer computer programming and website knowledge to help Jason, the owner of this thing, get it automated. That would be the best thing to do to help out. But I've enjoyed it. It's been fun.
Yeah, and I think it's one nice thing to get out, and I enjoy going out. I think every time I go to a park or somewhere open space and operate, as Chris said, we always get somebody come by, and if they're walking by you and they're looking, but they're worried to come and talk to you, call them over. Say, hey, come over. Yeah, we'll tell you what I'm doing. And the other thing Chris has done, and I really ought to do something if I'm not out working with Chris, is we have a board that we put up. It says Amateur Radio Station, Sutton and Cheam Amateur Radio Society. And that then at least sets people's mind at rest a little bit that we're not doing something illegal. And they come over and they'll have a chat. And they may or may not be interested, but it's also something else they've seen while you're out and about. So that can be a good one.
And Martin, that reminds me, I remember a couple of years ago, there was an article saying about a chap that had actually produced some leaflets to hand out to people, which I think is actually an excellent idea and something we should think about doing. So if you people to come,
I was going to say,
and ask questions.
Was that the "What on earth are you doing anyway" leaflet?
That's probably the one. Yes.
And the answer Frank's question, I believe it's state and federal parks. I don't believe the county parks are in the database. And I think that's a holdover from the national parks on the air.
It is. But Bill, my point was they only have those controlled by the state parks agency, and there are other parks.
Correct.
Or there are parks controlled by another state agency that's not the state parks and rec. That's my only point. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The state forests are in, as far as I know, up here in Pennsylvania in the database. So I'm not sure. I just know the county park that's eighth of a mile from my house, there's a little park, and that's not in the database because it's a county park.
Yeah, I have them all just because I do GIS, and I offered them to them, and there was like a small nuclear explosion in the email I got back from Jason. I think he's up to his eyeballs in data. He doesn't want any more data. But anyway.
Frank setting somebody off via email? I've never heard that happen before.
Never heard that before.
Well, there you go, boys. And I think it'll be fun. And even if it's not a park that's recognised, if you're out in a park, Aidan, you can always call one of the other parks, or you can sit and enjoy the fresh air, the sunshine, and the radio. So, Parks on the Air, think about it. It might be something you want to do. Right. That's the end of our news stories. Let's find out what the guys have been up to before we close this section. Now, Bill, I know you're on a hard stop, so I'm going to let you go first.
Yes, I've been busy with things. I got my Digi rig hooked up to the KX3. I'm actually on my third set of cables. The first set was breadboarded. The second set was wire wrapped and electrical taped. And this set, I attempted to make a nice cable short, measured it the right length I wanted, heat shrunk. It looked really sharp and the cable didn't work. So I ended up having to cut the heat shrink apart and figure out where I wired the cable up wrong. So I'll have to put some more heat shrink on that in a little while. But I've been using this now for a few weeks. Very impressed with this device on the KX3. It's probably the most sensitive sound card I've ever used, which is saying a lot because I had some very, very expensive back in the day, PSK 31 being popular. I had some very expensive Sound Blaster internal cards that I purchased because I wanted that level of sensitivity and the good high quality DSP chips. Likewise, I'm holding here in my hand a bag. Shake, 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 shake. It is a 49-to-1 Ballon kit because I'm building myself another lightweight end-fed half-wave for the soda bag. So I got to start on that project here next. DX-wise, I work Greenland on FT8. I know that's not really DX from here per se, but it was the first time I heard a Greenland station on in a while. I worked the HD8R on both SSB and FT8 on 17 and 15 meters. Worked some soda stations. And the bag of the month, the tag and bag of the month, I worked 7 Papa 8 Romeo uniform on 17 meters CW QRP.
Whoa.
I broke a pile up with 5 watts and a loop antenna. I was very proud of myself. I did a victory lap around the house, guys, and that's all I've been up to.
You should have been.
What do you mean that's all you've been up to? That's pretty damn good, Bill. I'm impressed. I'm glad you enjoyed it. So, yeah, probably makes what I've done go to shame a bit.
Well, yes. But I'm telling you, when I sent and my call came back, I was stunned because it was like the third call I made or something too. And I broke through the pile up and I'm like, the propagation gods have smiled upon me on this day.
Bill, just to clarify, was it QRP out of the radio into the linear? Or was the linear definitely off, yeah? 5 watts in, 1.5K out, yeah?
It's even worse. It's 5 watts into probably about 100 feet of RG8X.
Wow.
So yes, we got her done.
Yeah, when it works, it works. And I've had some great voice QSOs on QRP at stupidly low power across the pond when the conditions are there, and you just don't believe it. How well you're doing. But that's a good one, Bill.
When the bands are hot and the sun is not burping up garbage that shuts them down, 1 watt on phone will get you around the world. I've done it many times now. It's just that this last peak was not as exciting as I was hoping. And we had a real deep trial. And so it's been the first, real long DX QRP SIGs QSO I made since like 2013, maybe. It's been a while.
It certainly has. Right. Frank, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, as frequent listeners to the podcast know, I had the feature in the last episode. I was not on as a presenter, but the Lost Tribe audio feature. And I've gotten some very positive feedback on both the content and the production using other hams for voiceover narration of historic quotes and that sort of thing. And I appreciate that very much. I will say the full printed article in the October 2021, The Spectrum Monitor, is now legally available as a PDF on the front page at foxmikehotel.com. So listeners who don't subscribe to that magazine but want to read that, Ken Reitz has given me permission to circulate it at will. Well, I finally got my ICOM ID 5100A dual band D-Star radio operational in my shack. I've got a separate little diamond dual band antenna in my attic. And I was able to assist getting one of our 2 area D-Star repeaters back on the air, K5 RKN, and been learning a bit more. Rubber meets the road on D-Star traffic and listening to some of that. A couple of years ago, I had donated a D-Star repeater, a 2-meter repeater that's now on the air in my hometown of Sandersville, Georgia. The call sign is W4SAN. So it'll be good for me to link up to that and chat with some hams in Washington County back home, a couple of states away from time to time. I also completed my installation and testing of a Cushcraft D4 rotatable dipole. It's about 36 feet long. That's up in my attic. Now, of course, it doesn't rotate. It's fixed with broadside to England and New Zealand. And Martin, we need to get our 1 watt tuned up here on 20 meters and see if we can hop the pond since I'm pointed directly at you. It tuned up really well using an antenna analyzer, much better than I thought, since I've got the fallback radiator barrier up there. I tested it for a while using a 0.2 of a watt whisper beacon, and that's heard from Australia to Europe on 40 through 10, which maybe not terribly unusual, but it's still good to know that it's working that well. My first contact was using QRP, Bill, a little 5 watts on my Jagu X5105 on 40 meters, and I was able to interrupt a couple of hams and a rag chew in Texas and Nebraska, and they gave me 5.7 and 5.9 signal reports. So I've got that paper about that experience, and yes, an attic antenna can work. It's under review at a ham radio magazine, so maybe I'll have some luck and get that out in the coming months. And I will say this, there's nothing like getting something for free to make you spend more money. A couple of years ago, I got about a dozen AGM lead acid type batteries, 12 volts, from a fellow ham who works for a company that services medical equipment. So they have these batteries in them in case they're taking a measurement and the power blips or whatever. So I built a few battery boxes. I've got some. I gave some to members of my portable ops team. And after fighting the feeling I was getting a hernia, I'm replacing them to lithium iron phosphate or LiFePO batteries, and building a couple of additional ones for some real higher amp capacity. So I'll write about those builds and operations at k4fmh.com in a couple of weeks. In fact, as we're recording, I hear the UPS truck delivering a couple of those LiFePO batteries now. And finally, I did another POTA activation at Brasher's Stand on the Natchez Trace Parkway with Mike N5DU and Clay AC5Z. Had a great fall morning shooting waves in the air. We had about 20 contacts, and we had lunch at an area restaurant, and a good time was had by all. So not quite as much exciting news as Bill's reported on his contact at QRP, but enough to keep me largely out of trouble, Martin.
Well, sounds like you've enjoyed yourself, Frank, and you have kept out of trouble. So that's good news. Yeah, you've really enjoyed yourselves, and I feel really guilty because I've been busy, but I ain't got anywhere near as much to show as you guys have. So, Martin, what have you been up to?
Probably not anywhere near as much as anybody else because I've not been well. I've had all sorts of stuff going on at work and looking after my daughter. Been on the ICQ talk group, of course, via all three modes. More DMR and Fusion than D-Star at the moment, just because I have a DMR radio in my home office. I have a Fusion radio in my car, and so I tend to switch between the two. I did manage to brick DroidStar on my phone by installing the latest version of the app. It does appear that the developer took the vocoder out of it, and it didn't seem to work for anything. I thought, well, basically, that's brick the app. Fortunately, if you look on YouTube, you can find out where to download the original version of the app, reinstall it, and it works just as good as it did before. So if you've got DroidStar on your phone, best thing to do, don't update that because you will lose pretty much every bit of functionality of the app. My HF antenna is still down. We took it down to have some trees chopped back to build the office that I'm sitting in. I haven't put it back up because I've got to get some of that nylon rope to attach it to the trees. I haven't got round to it yet. And finally, the only other thing I did was I had an issue that I needed to reach out to the RSGB for, completely unrelated to the podcast. And I reached out to them, sent them an email, said, look, hey, can you help me with this? And just to be clear, I'm asking as a member of the RSGB and an amateur radio operator, not as a member of the amateur radio media. Irrespective of that, they responded to me like within half an hour, maybe 40 minutes. I was really impressed how quickly they responded and followed up and resolved my query. So thank you very much to them for that. I know just randomly chatting to them, they said they've been like really busy, but they're glad they're able to support everyone during this time. So yeah, it's credit to them, and glad I'm a member. So yeah, all good.
Yeah, sounds good, Martin. Sounds good. And obviously, well, I think we've all been busier than we think we have. I've now just put Chris on the spot, haven't I? What have you been up to, Chris?
Well, a few things. Not as many as some of the other guys, though, certainly. So I think you mentioned the last podcast, I think the last one, although not the one I was on, you'd helped me with my camper van. So we've now got a vertical aerial for that, which works on some of the HF bands, works pretty well, so thanks for that. I think there's a little bit of tweaking just to sort of get it slightly more in tune, but we made a few contacts at Martin. I think it worked pretty well. Been on the RSQ podcast digital talk group a little bit, so I've spoken to a few folks on there the last few weeks, although not as much as I have been now that I'm back in the office. Can't be using it during the day, unfortunately. And I think it was a couple of weekends ago, there was the CQ Worldwide SSB contest on. Now, I'm not a contester, but I do find sometimes big contests like that, it can be handy, perhaps at the end of the contest when stations are really trying to work as many stations, the last few stations they possibly can when they're calling CQ and desperate to talk to anybody, just put a call out, or just respond to someone calling CQ and be amazed how much better you get out than normally, because they really want to talk to you. So, it's kind of the opposite of a pile-up. They really want to hear who they can. So I managed to work a station in Kuwait and quite a few others actually. So that was quite nice. Contests they can be useful to sort of check that things do work, and that suddenly people's ears start to work better, shall we say, when at the end of a contest they want to get those extra points. And then tomorrow night I'm doing a talk, or more of a discussion really, at the radio club at the Sutton and Cheam Club, just on websites and amateur radio. I thought that might be a good one. We haven't done before on that, and we know there's lots of things out there, and I'm sure members will have their own ideas and their own favourites. So it's more of a kind of get together and sort of sharing sort of knowledge about what's out there, because we know there's an awful lot on the internet, lots and lots of really useful information, interesting information that's out there. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah. Well, say it was fun. I can't remember if I mentioned on the last podcast whether I mentioned I did the talk for the Sutton and Cheam Club. Probably did, because it was a month ago. We did a talk on how we set up the digital talk group. high-level stuff, but it got a few people interested, which was good. Right, what else have I been up to? Well, we're back to club meetings again. The meet up at the Scout Hall on a Monday night. I think every club's probably going to have a similar sort of situation to us. Although we are back on opened up to meetings, I think a few people are still a bit worried about coming up because I think they're still a little bit worried about the COVID thing. But hopefully we will start to see more people as time goes on. Mainly been on VHF, UHF, bit of 4 meters, and I really ought to try HF. I meant to, but I've just been so busy on other things. So what I do is I grab the handy talkie and do a bit when I can, or from the car. Been doing a lot of work on the ICQ podcast digital talk group infrastructure. And by the time this podcast goes out, we should have our main servers in a different data managed service area, and hopefully that should now give us a bit more reliability. We have had a couple of reliability problems. Mostly we've got them fixed quick when they've been something we could get at, but so that's now working along quite nicely. And once the last bit of work's done by the weekend, I think we're going to put a freeze on everything until the new year. So I don't think that we'll be doing anything major between Sunday and the release date of this and the new year, unless something urgently happens. So let's say that's that one. Have had my 3rd COVID jab, boys. I've had my booster. I got really annoyed because it took them, well, they were running late. You booked your appointment, they were running extremely late. And then they made me sit there for 15 minutes afterwards. So the whole thing took about an hour and a quarter to get a quick jab in the arm, which I walked away with no side effects from. So, yeah, I've been done. On the talk group, I am still seeing a lot of people just blipping it. Now, okay, if you need to blip it to connect your radio, that's fine. But if you just blip it for a fraction of a second, chances are you've only logged into part of the system. So if, for argument's sake, you're on a Fusion and you blip it for half a second, there's a fairly good chance that D-Star and DMR don't know you're there. So if you were trying to get let people know you're on, you're not being counted in the other networks because it hasn't made it across the bridge into the other systems. So if you want to be seen, blip it for at least a second, probably about a second and a half, and that will guarantee you being recognised in all the modes. And yeah, the Droid Star, Martin, Ed sent me some information on the Droid Star. There are some changes on what you did, which I'll send you over. There is a gentleman that has the vocoders on his server, and he's offering telling you how to do it. So effectively, you download the new version of Droid Star, you go to this gentleman's server, you download the vocoder, and you install it into Droid Star, and you're back working as normal. Now, I hasten to add that I don't know how long it'll be before his site gets shut down, but there is an option, and Droid Star could be repairable. I do have details. Not sure if I ought to publish them on the website, but if you're really desperate, to drop me an email at info@icqpodcast.com.
So Martin, my guess is it's a copyright issue or something, is it, with the vocoder?
My guess would be that, but nobody's actually said it is.
Yeah, I read the whole thing on it, and he doesn't mention it at all. In the latest update, doesn't even mention taking it out. it just says to get the vocoders you need to, you can refer to our notes on GitHub, and you go to it and like it's all technical stuff well above what I understand. I sort of read, because it was like such a major component that they've taken out of it. I think they've probably had a hit from whoever owns the vocoder and said, you can't give that out, because it all disappeared very, very quickly. And usually you can go back and just roll back to an earlier version, but it's not available. It's disappeared from like Play Store and stuff. But if you look on YouTube, so people have got like, here it is, and they're sending links to it. So there's nothing that says, the license at the moment says you can use it. They haven't said you shouldn't be using this, take it off your system. Sorry, we did something wrong. But I don't know. It's only speculation at the moment, of course.
Yeah. Well, I've got the links to where you can get the vocoders and the instructions for doing it. As I say, Ed sent it to me, and I also got it from a second source. So maybe it's maybe it might be of interest to somebody. Okay, well, all that's left for me to do is to close up now and say thank you very much, guys, for joining me tonight. I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCA.
Thank you, Martin. Thanks, guys. Another fun episode. Thank you.
Yeah, good one, Chris. I'd like to thank Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL.
Been fun. See you next time.
Yeah, you will do. And Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH.
Thank you for having me again, Martin. I always enjoy it.
No problems at all, Frank. And Bill was on a hard stop, and he would say goodbye to you all, but he's had to go. So 73 all, and we'll continue with the podcast. 73, guys.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin, M6BOY. Call for award nominations now for CWops Award for Advancing the Art of CW Award. Now, this award's been tugging along nicely since 2016, and it's given to radio amateurs, individuals who are not amateur radios, organisations and contributors for those that help the advancement of CW. So there's a great opportunity to nominate someone for this prestigious award, and the great news is you've got a little bit of time to get those nominations in. These nominations go until March next year, and the successful people or persons will receive a plaque to be presented at Dayton Hamvention, as I say, in May next year. So I say, think of the people important to you that have done the work for CW, and maybe give them a shout and go from there. We'll put obviously the link of how you can apply on icqpodcast.com. Now, you hear us talk a lot about the ICQ Podcast digital group, and the Galway Amateur Radio group over in Ireland have come up with quite an interesting documentation. Now, whilst some of it is Irish-centric, there's a lot of other bits of information about how to program certain radios, etc., for digital radio operations. So, again, we're going to pop you a link to this file, which you can download from the Galway Amateur Radio Club, and certainly might help you break the mould and get yourself onto digital radio. And we'd love to hear you on talk group 9480, and come and talk to us on the ICQ podcast group. Now, with all the negativity regarding cancelled rallies, etc., we've been advised that the Hamzilla radio rally will be on in March 2022. It takes place in Sandwich in Kent in the UK. Now, we're still waiting for more details in relation to trader tables and attractions, etc., but this looks very, very positive. Good news as well is we're very hopeful that we'll be sending a team from the ICQ podcast. The guys located in London will hopefully round up as many as we can, and we'll be there, as I say, at the Hamzilla convention, or rally, should I say, on the 13th of March. So we look forward to seeing you there. Right, now we're going to head over to our features episode, and as I say, we've been chatting to the RSGB regarding Tackling RFI, the IRU Region 1 conference update, training, and the second unit of virtual conferencing. Lots to cover, so I hope you enjoy.
And now, what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Well, hi guys. For this feature, I managed to track it down, the RSGB managed to track me down, because over the summer we've all been very busy, and I ended up with an email problem that half my emails weren't arriving. But I'm alive and well, and so is everybody else. So I'd first like to introduce Heather Parsons, who's the Communications Manager at the RSGB. Hi, Heather.
Hi, Martin.
Yeah. We have Mr. Steve Thomas, M1ACB, who's the General Manager of the RSGB.
Hello, Martin. Great to be back with you again.
Yeah, good to have you. We also have Mr. Stuart Bryant, G3YSX, who's the current president.
Thank you, Martin.
Yeah, and last but not least, not for any particular reason, we have Tony Kent, G8PBH, who's the Examination Standards Committee Chair. So should be a very, very interesting group discussion today, and hopefully we'll find out all the things you've been up to over the last few months since we last spoke. I'm going to start on the first one. Stuart, we spent some time and we interviewed you regarding the IRU Region 1 workshop. How did it go?
I thought very well, particularly considering that it was a pioneering effort to hold a workshop for around, I think, 90 people attended at one time or another. And to do what would normally be done as a face-to-face meeting, to do it entirely by virtual and internet technologies. So it was a major event in its own right. But yes, we had a very productive and very hard week of work, and we've produced some objectives. Presumably we'll discuss those in more detail in a moment.
Yeah, well, it'd be very interesting to hear what those objectives are and what actually came out of the workshop, because I know we spoke with you on the podcast and said what we thought ought to happen, and I noticed that some of the other member countries had a completely different idea to where, say, you were going. So hopefully it all married up quite well.
Yes, we kind of started from scratch, as it were, with those various SWOT things as background, and the organisers took us through a process very similar to the process that the RSGB went through some years ago to produce its strategy. And what we did was we started out working out what was sort of fundamental to amateur radio. And we worked from that to understand our core purpose and overarching goal. And we were doing this in a context where the majority of amateur radio national societies in Region 1, so Region 1 I should explain is Europe, Middle East, Africa and Northern Asia, where the majority are actually in decline. And we started off with this fairly depressing sort of starting point, which is if we do nothing, then it's going to decline further. And we tried to work out and put in place a series of stretch goals to what would we ideally like amateur radio to be like in about 10 years' time. And we came to the conclusion, this is, of course, all of the countries across Region 1, that we would regard it as successful. What we would like to see, if amateur radio is booming across Region 1, it has evolved to become one of the leading communities of expertise for science and technology enthusiasts. Note both science and technology as well as radio here. It is rightly respected and admired both for its self-development opportunities that it offers and for the value it delivers to society as a whole. And the delivery of value to society as a whole is important because we get access to some incredibly expensive spectrum that costs a lot of money if it was converted into sort of economic terms. And I think we have to show that for all of the resources that we are given, we develop and produce things that are of value to society in the wider context and not just to the amateur radio specialist community.
That sounds good, because we need to be out there showing people what we do and being involved with other things. And I know you and I have talked about things like maker groups and all those sort of people that are starting to use RF as part of their hobby. I think that's where we need to go.
Yeah, there is a sort of a realization. There's two realizations actually. One is that there is this wider group of people, and we need to engage with them, and we need to show them the value of wireless. There's also a thought that amateur radio would be stronger if it included people who are also interested in technology generally and can sort of show us what they can do so that we can add to it. So we produce a more holistic, rounded engineering and social sort of community. Because what's difficult for us may be hard for another group, and vice versa. And by putting this wider pool together, I think we develop a much stronger, a more useful science community. And we saw some of that, for example, with the keynote talk at the convention, where amateur radio was being used directly in physics and astronomy. So we were looking for the wider objectives, and we also set out a list of 8 strategy objectives. For example, I'll just look at the first one. Amateur radio is continually redefined and refocused to be relevant and appealing to a whole range of science and technology interest groups. So this is important that we continue to move amateur radio forward. Now, having said that, and there was a point I made at the convention, there has to be a space for those who want to do traditional things, and there has to be a space for those who want to move on to do new things. And we have to work together, and there may be some give and take that's needed as a result. But I think it's really important that we remember our heritage and we support our heritage, but people who from the heritage group community support the continual evolution of amateur radio to the extent that elements of it may be not what they're used to.
I think you're dead right on that one. A lot of what I do, some people say that's not real radio. But at the end of the day, it's interesting to me. It's enjoyable. The people that are involved, it's enjoyable. Now, as you say, we can't all be contesters. We can't all be CW operators. We can't all be digital voice people, whatever you want to say. Our hobby's so wide, there's room in there for everybody, isn't there, Stuart?
Absolutely. And it's important that we all respect each other and we actually build on each other's strengths and skills to develop a much stronger community as a whole.
Now you've had this discussion, and obviously some good things have come out for it. What's going to happen next, and what's the likely timescales that we'll start seeing some of these things come to fruition?
Well, what's going to happen is, so we finished the workshop, and now the IARU leadership is putting together a program to try and develop some of these things. Now, these things, of course, are kind of separate from things that we would do as a radio society ourselves, in as much as we will still do the right things locally for the amateur radio community in this country, and there are many things that only we can do. So we have our 8 objectives, which I will be writing some more about in a future edition of Radcom, not the next one, but the one after. And what the IARU Executive Committee is going to do is to set up a program board and then set up with a view of overseeing the proposed projects and managing and approving the funding for them. But they would also like to set up some project teams to achieve some of these objectives. And we're going to be looking for people to volunteer to work in some of those project teams. In my view, ideally on projects that would benefit not only IARU, but would benefit the UK amateur radio community as well. So we're going to be looking for ideas from people, because we don't have a monopoly of ideas. Our job is really to provide the resources that people can use in order to make amateur radio this much bigger and much more a much wider interest to the rest of the world. So we're going to be looking for proposals, and hopefully people will think outside the box and think beyond what amateur radio is today and what amateur radio could be in 10 years as a much more all-encompassing, innovative, experimental, modern hobby that promotes STEM and is of interest to governments for what we do in order for them to justify the resources that they donate to us, particularly spectrum resources. So anyway, that's where we are. That's where we've got to. The next phase is a post-workshop period of planning, followed by the launch of the projects themselves.
Yeah, sounds good. Now, I'm going to say something for anybody who's thinking of being a potential volunteer. Don't get me wrong, volunteering is a lot of work. But what Stuart's looking for is people that are interested in doing something. I mean, it's a bit like the ICQ podcast. We're all volunteers. Once you've got a platform and a group moving in a direction, it might be a lot of work. But you know what? If you're doing something that you really enjoy, what's the problem? I think going forward is a good thing on that. So that's where I would be.
Yes, it's a lot of fun doing work for the community. And I've been doing it for quite a few years now with the RSGB, and I found it a lot of fun, a lot of interest. You meet a lot of people. A lot of good ideas are generated, and it moves the hobby forward, or the service forward. Amateur radio is a service, of course. It moves the amateur radio service forward.
Well, that's all good news.
Martin, I was just going to add something if I can,
Yeah,
because I was on the IARU workshop with Stuart and with Dave Wilson and Murray Nyman as well, and it was, from my point of view, it was fascinating to see what all the other national societies were up to. So IARU Region 1, there's about 100 national societies. I think it's 100. So we are just one of 100. But it was really fascinating to see how amateur radio was different in all of those countries and what the different national societies were doing in those countries and what they were willing to share and learn from each other. And it's something that we had an opportunity to show people what we've been doing during, the last few years, what amateur radio had been like in the UK. But also we learned a huge amount from all of those other national societies about just how different amateur radio is around the world. Is that fair, Stuart, do you think?
Yes, I think that's fair. I was also, as you were saying that, it was going through my mind, is we need to remember how lucky we are, because we have a very liberal regime here. And some other countries, it's like being back in the 50s, the way that they're regulated, with all kinds of pressures on them and what they can do, and only limited things they can do. And we're very lucky in our relationship with the regulator. So when we needed to transform the exam system, that was basically, as I understand it, Steve, just a phone call. And other countries are nowhere near that in terms of having a relationship with the regulator that allows them to move amateur radio forward to what it needs to do.
Yeah, very different regimes around the world. You're right. And just on the volunteering part, of course, the RSGB puts in a lot of volunteers into the IARU activities as well as the RSGB's own activities. And we're always looking for ways to recognise that. So the people that do put in a huge amount of volunteer effort. But certainly something I got out of the workshop was I got a huge amount out of that exposure to those other organisations. And that was, if you like, the payback for the time that we all spent in those workshops and that conference. So I got a huge amount out of it, way outside of my my employment grade with the RSGB, if you will. It was a really great opportunity to see what was going on around the world. So I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, and it was a huge amount of work, and people should appreciate that Steve was not only doing his ordinary day job, but worked continuously for 10 days, many hours into the evening, doing this.
That was not a plug, Stuart, honestly.
No, but I do appreciate the huge amount of work, and I think it's important for UK radio amateurs and members in particular to appreciate the huge amount of work that goes on behind the scenes to achieve some of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And the number of volunteers in the IARU and in the executive committee, as well as all the way across
Yes,
the
indeed.
RSGB. There's an enormous number of people there working for the greater good of amateur radio, isn't there? That's the big thing. It's easy to forget sometimes.
Yes. Lots and lots of people, and of course the huge amount of work that Don Beattie, G3BJ, put in to causing that workshop to happen, and then managing it all the way through with some very able help from both here and a team in America, as it turns out, who were sort of helping to facilitate it. But it was a huge amount of work to do this. A very, very interesting project in many different dimensions.
I think we're going to talk a little bit more about, online meetings when we get to the convention bit. But the IARU workshop was almost a unique event, wasn't it? With the hybrid way, it was not hybrid. It was wholly online, and normally they meet in person. So that was quite a shift for them. Anyway, I've taken over your interview, Martin.
No, I was going to say that I've done an awful lot of online work over these last 2 years, being in the sort of technical standards community. And this was, without exception, the best online workshop sort of session that I have attended in all that 2 years.
Well, the other thing, guys, is that these workshops, like any good get-together of people working on a project, is you build relationships with the other people, relationships with the people in the other countries, so that things become a lot easier to solve if you know the person you're talking to.
Absolutely. And indeed, many people sort of regretted that we couldn't meet face-to-face for exactly that reason. But yeah, we live in the world as it is, and a face-to-face meeting would not have been possible in the current sort of pandemic situation.
That's true. Okay, let's have a quick word with Tony Kent, G8PBH, who's...
Hello, Martin.
Hi, Tony. Tony's the RSGB's Examination Standards Committee Chair. Now, we've done quite well as a group over the last year during the COVID and one thing and another, and I think it would be worthwhile you just giving us a bit of how it's all gone.
Well, I think it's gone much better than we could have possibly imagined at the start. I mean, back 18 months or so ago when all this kicked off, I mean, we were sort of looking down the barrel of nobody being able to get a license. But due to the hard work of the examinations team and also the team of remote invigilators, with something over 4,000 new licensees that passed their exams during that period. So I mean, overall, it's gone much better than we could have expected. So yeah, I say, I mean, much thanks to Dave Wilson and his team for putting on those online examinations.
Yeah, and I believe now we're going to start resuming clubs being able to do the examinations. But I think we talked last time, and you were going to parallel run online and club ones. Is that still the case?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that the online exams, remote invigilated exams, have been extremely popular, and it would be crazy to end those. But on that said, there's a number of candidates who, for whatever reason, that isn't the way they want. Maybe they don't have the facilities to do the exams at home, or maybe they just, whatever reason, prefer to do them in a more traditional way. So clubs will come back online and provide that option for people, but certainly we will continue with the online.
Yeah, that's good news. That's good news, because it does allow people, if they can't make a club, and I've spoken to people, we're not as bad as the States, by the way, and I don't mean, I'm not having a go at the States, but they are phenomenal mileage sometimes. But I've heard of people having to travel 50 miles to go to a club, and I think the furthest, we were in South London when I teach, the furthest away anybody's travelled is Southern Ireland. But I'll let him off because he was my son. But looking forward, I mean, you've got new mock exam papers. Hopefully they will reflect and I should have looked at them, I'll be honest with you, but I assume they reflect all the new stuff that's gone into the syllabus recently.
Yeah, the new mock papers. Let me just give you a little bit of background to this, because there have for a long time been mock papers available on the RSGB website that candidates can use to practice for the exam. But in the past, these were specially created papers, so specially created example papers, you might say, with questions that were written, questions that were written specifically for the mock papers. But what we have decided to do now, and this is with the agreement of the regulator, is actually release questions from the actual question bank, and have produced mock papers using real questions that are still in the bank. So they're actual questions, and there is a probability that somebody could find a question that's on the mock come up in their actual exam. So that's a good motivation to actually work through, do the mocks, and learn and understand the questions. But for that reason, we can say that these mocks are absolutely representative of what candidates will meet in the real exam, because they're actually taken from the real question bank.
Yeah, well, two things on that, and I actually think that's a good thing, is that when I did my American exams 10 years ago at the RSGB convention, I'd spent a lot of time doing their mock exams, and I think in the UK everybody said, "Oh, UK amateurs, well, you only have to remember all the questions." There was no way you could remember all the answers to all the questions. Not when there's like each exam level was about 800 questions per exam level, and a lot of the questions were very similar, so you couldn't do it, in fairness. But I think, doing a proper exam questions much better. I know when we teach foundation, the revision day before they do their exam, some of the questions I've put together are ambiguous, and there are a couple in there that usually generate a bit of an argument, and I can usually tell if the students are getting an understanding, they want to pick an argument with us over some of the questions because they are ambiguous. But that's just the way I do it. It doesn't mean to say it's right, and it proves to me that they're actually using their brain to reason through, and they've understood the subject. So, but having the correct questions in is a good one.
Well, absolutely, and I think that there is also, as you say, that you created questions. That also questions have the style, very much the style of the people that create them, and the real questions are created by the examination and syllabus review group that go in the bank. And so candidates will actually, through doing these mock papers, will actually learn also the sort of style of the questions that you get in the real exam. So that's, I think, an important point.
Certainly is. Now, one of the things that I sit on the fence a little bit on this one. I am a real believer in the 3-tier system. Don't get me wrong. I think it's the right thing to do. I know there are people who want to go straight to their full license. However, I can't say you can't do it, because I went straight to a full license. And okay, I might have had a radio electronics background, but who's to stop other people doing it? So I think it's interesting when people do want to go to a full license, as long as they know what they're letting themselves in for, Tony. I think is that one.
We detect there's clearly a market for people who want a direct route through to full. I think actually some of that was answered under the remote invigilation, where a number of people did all 3 exams in a relatively short period of time and got through to full. But going forward, I think there is a demand, particularly for people, electronics professionals, STEM academics, PhD students or level people who want to get into the hobby and could potentially bring a lot to the hobby in terms of their skills, ability perhaps to get involved with training, developing new technologies, new ideas. So we want to encourage these people by providing this option of direct to full. We had a consultation actually quite a while ago, earlier in the year, and clearly the community as a whole were very supportive. We haven't yet published the results of that, but we've analysed them within the exams teams, and the community itself is strongly supporting this way. So it's going to happen. The problem is that it's been put on the back burner mainly as a result of the requirements to upgrade the syllabus and the question bank for the new EMF regulations, which Ofcom are providing quite a bit of pressure to us to incorporate in the examinations and training systems. So that's kind of put the direct to full on the back burner for the moment, but we will be bringing those proposals back and moving on with it as soon as we've dealt with the EMF issue.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. And the EMF issue did hit some people by surprise this year, but it is a very important thing to do. And in fairness, I suppose I like the fact that we've got two different options. We can either do the 3-tier system or you can go straight to full. I think the important thing for somebody starting in the hobby is enjoy the hobby. It's not a race to get to full license. All right, when I took mine, and some of the other people here, obviously you, Tony, and Stuart, because of your call signs, and probably Steve, we went straight to full license because that was the only option we had. But today, we're letting more people enjoy our hobby, and if it takes you 5 years or 10 years to go from foundation to full, enjoy the hobby. It's not a race.
Yes, absolutely. And although, again, we were just talking about, having in parallel, club exams and online exams. And there's no suggestion here that there'll be any change to people's ability to go through the stages, the 3-tier system, and get their license that way. That will continue, and will cater for probably the majority of potential licensees in the future. But direct to full will be there it'll be very much targeted at the specialist, somebody with many years of experience. I absolutely agree that this we had no option. We had to go direct to full, and for many, it was quite a steep learning curve to get straight to that level from nowhere. So we wouldn't want to change the 3-tier system, which gives many more people the opportunity to get into the hobby. And even if they don't, even if they never progress all the way, they can certainly enjoy the aspects of the hobby that they can at foundation or intermediate level.
They certainly can. And just as a quick side note on that, I happened to be with an M7 yesterday who I actually taught, so there's nothing on that. I have nothing against M7s. And he was telling me, he's an electrician. I'm not going to give his call sign away. He's an electrician, and he had to do some work at the weekend on a big site in London. And the site said, we'll supply you radios. And they started talking to him about, this is how to use it, one thing or other. And he didn't ram it down their throat. He knew what he was talking about. But when they'd finished and they were telling him all about the problems they're getting with other people coming up on the channel, he said to them, well, you can change the channel, that channel knob at the top does go to 16, it is programmed all the way up. So, but he was nice about it. So that's a nice one for an amateur, not to jump down people's throats and say, I know all about it, because, guys, the longer I've been in this hobby, the more I realise just how little I really do know. So, yeah.
Martin, I was just going to add, you asked about how I got into amateur radio, or what my licence route was. I was actually the product of the novice licence some years ago. So I had it was 2-tier when I did it. There was the novice REE, and then I did the full REE. So not quite the single route, or not quite the 3 level that we got now. But I was part of the 2-level system.
Yeah, the two-level system was around when I started coming into it. Unfortunately, she isn't listening. Mrs. B managed to give some poor guy a flea in the ear. I was looking for a course, and there was a course quite locally that were teaching the novice, and there was a course in 50 miles away that was teaching the full license. And the poor guy rang up for the novice license, said, is he interested? And she said, no, he wants to get a proper license. Oh dear. I hope she didn't upset him too much. But in fairness, yeah, it worked for me. It worked for me because I had an electronics radio background anyway. But for others, whichever way you come in, I mean, you know, I've known guys come in who had no real experience in radio at all, and sort of sat with their mates at the pub and thought, oh, let's go and do it just for a laugh. And they're now full license holders and have learned a hell of a lot and really enjoy the hobby. So the hobby's good.
I think one of the things that can help now is that there's, as a result of the, there's always some positives to come out of things like COVID, and one of the things is the sort of wider availability of sort of distance learning, remote learning courses that people can do. So there's not that, problem that you mentioned earlier, that people may be, many miles away from an active club that offers training, or maybe, due to their age, they can't get out to the meetings at the time they are. So these distance learning courses that have come on stream from a number of clubs are certainly fulfilling a need.
This is all about making it accessible, isn't it, to everybody, whichever route they want to come in. And it's definitely done that. And the direct to full makes it accessible to somebody who already knows that and wants to come in a different route. So the more routes, the better, I think, really.
I think we're probably the leading country in terms of accessibility for the exam, aren't we? To the extent that some countries want to borrow our system.
Indeed, yep. We've had inquiries from other countries, haven't we?
Yeah. Well, as I say, I know a lot of things that happen in Region 1. The presenters in the States say, I wish our region was doing what your region does on a lot of things. That you may not hear this on the podcast, but in pre-show chats, they often say, your Region 1's doing the right thing. So that's good.
I think there were, a lot of the changes that have occurred were, to the exam system, were being thought about before the COVID situation. Certainly remote invigilation, which one option was to have had that provided by the online exams provider, TestReach, have a remote invigilation, and ESC was considering that before COVID. But I think the whole situation has accelerated. The whole COVID situation accelerated these ideas, and actually we ended up probably with a better system with the RSGB provided online invigilation, which made everything far more accessible to candidates, and certainly minimised costs for candidates as well. So, say good things to come out of a bad situation, I suppose. But I think we're in a much better place now in terms of accessibility.
And that was an absolutely fantastic volunteer example of what volunteers can do, wasn't it? Because the remote invigilation team were absolutely amazing through lockdown and still continue to be doing some fantastic work for people coming into the hobby. It's been brilliant.
Certainly has. Right, well, I'm going to move on now. Steve, you have been vocal, but we're going to talk to Steve and Heather, read the RSGB convention and looking ahead at what's going on. Heather, go first, because you haven't had a chance to have a say yet.
That's fine. I've been listening carefully. The convention, yes, it was the second time that we'd put on an online event. We thought long and hard about whether we should make it an in-person event, but the signs weren't looking great when we had to make that decision many months ahead. And we just know how many people we reach through online. obviously an in-person convention, we maybe reach 500, 600 people. This year, developed from last year, we had over 5,000 views of the live event just on the day and that was radio amateurs from 5 different continents. So from an engagement point of view, a geographical reach, you can't beat an online event, but we do know that there are many things about an in-person event that people miss, and as we all do, but the social aspects, the sharing experiences, the sharing ideas and things like that you only happen really when you're chatting to somebody. But we were delighted by the number of people that got involved in our event, both on the day and afterwards. We did, as you know, 15 presentations live streamed throughout the day, 8 hours of live streaming on 2 different, I was going to say channels, but channels as in one was for people who were in an introduction to, the second one was for people who wanted to learn a bit more in-depth information. And those 2 full live streams have now had over 10,500 views between them. We've since released the individual presentations in 2 groups, and those again are also being enjoyed by people who are going back and who were with us on the day but couldn't obviously watch both streams, going back to look at other things that they were interested in, or going back to listen again to things that they found fascinating, and particularly things like Dan's soldering. You can go back to that again and watch him and learn. So we were delighted by the event, delighted by how much engagement we had from a wide range of people in the community, and the fact that I think that this year, still more than last year, we were able to show the appeal of amateur radio to such a wide range of people in the population. Obviously, we have Professor Catherine Mitchell doing our keynote. I know Steve will talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And then we had from that through to the 4 STEAMettes, as they call themselves, the 11-year-old girls who are just doing some fantastic stuff with John Hislop. They're not licensed yet. They're studying for their foundation at the moment, but they are still finding things that they can enjoy about wireless communications and the link between what they're learning at school in their science and maths. And if you've managed to see the presentation, you'd have seen that we had an interview with their mums as well, who were thrilled, not just at the links with the school curriculum, but also about how much confidence the girls had gained since they'd started doing these things, these activities with John, and they're making QSOs across the channel and all sorts of exciting things. And they'd grown in confidence and in their ability to explain things and to chat to people of adults and children alike at school. So massive appeal, I think, to lots of different parts of the community. And obviously the challenge is what we do next. But I'll come back to you now and we'll talk a little bit more about the science aspect of it, which we were very pleased to have this year.
Yeah, well, that's all great. And I'll be honest with you, I do enjoy the one-to-ones. I know that the ICQ podcast are a bit of a nightmare for the marketing people sometimes, Heather. But we do behave ourselves honest.
Of course.
Steve keeps us under control.
I'm not sure I do.
I think the interesting one was Ian said to me at one of the presentations we were doing in the corridor, and he said, "I've been put with you lot to keep you under control, but I've got no hope, have I?" And smiled. But no, we wouldn't do anything naughty. That's the important thing. But yeah, the conventions are great. I look forward to them coming back. On the fact that if they come back, there is the face-to-face meetings with people and getting to actually put names to faces and shake hands and all those sort of things. But you're dead right, Heather. By opening it up online, you're opening it up as a worldwide event, which can only put the RSGB in a good light with some of the lectures you were doing. So great. So Steve, what's your thoughts on some of this?
The convention is a fantastic event for us every year. You know that because we normally see you there. And that face-to-face element is incredibly important. As Heather said, we normally see about 500-600 people when we hold the event in Milton Keynes, normally at Kens Hill. And that's across the Friday evening all the way through to the end of Sunday. And that's how we used to run a convention. And that's evolved over many years. And what we've tried to do in the last probably 5 or 6 years, if not before that, is widen the appeal of it. Okay, so what we find is people that go to the first time they go to the event, they're not really sure if it's going to be for them or if the topics are going to be too technical for them or anything like that. And once they've been once, they go every year because they realise that we've worked hard to have a really broad range of topics at the convention for people to learn about. And there's some great people to talk to, meet in the corridor, meet in coffee, meet in the bar, have dinner with, whichever way you want to do it. That's the face-to-face part of the convention. So worldwide technical experts that are accessible and you can have a beer with, right? That's the convention in a nutshell. Of course, when you do that online, it's a whole different affair because there's some positives. Right? You can bring people in from the other side of the world, and we had presenters live with us from New Zealand and from the States and Spain, I think, and there was, all around the world. So we can do that much more easily, but you lose the face-to-face interaction. So the way we try and do that is to have the people who've been presenting taking live questions, and we have 2 people running the streams that try and take those questions and put them live to the presenters. And so we try and build some interaction in there. And we went a bit further this year with the operations from the National Radio Centre where I was. And we were talking to people, members of the public that were coming into the NRC. We did some interviews there. So we tried to make it, more interactive and things like that. But it is very difficult to blend those two things together. Fantastic that we get 5,000 people on the day joining us for, the online version, but the 500 or 600 that go in person miss their element of it. So we're really going to try and work out how we bring that together into some sort of hybrid event, as you might call it, in the future once we are all allowed to get back together. So we're asking people to give us suggestions on that as well. But if I just talk a little bit more, and I can, about the how we ran it on the day. So we ran, as Heather said, 2 8-hour streams. So there's 16 hours of fantastic content for people to go and watch on YouTube if they want to. Now it's all there. Either they can watch the whole days, both streams if they want to, or they can watch the individual sessions. They can pick and choose. But it's all split up into two different streams, the introduction to and the learn more about. So if you're a beginner or you want to find out about something new, there's the introduction to. If you want to go into a lot more depth and a lot more detail, there's the learn more about stream. So we've immediately made it accessible for newcomers. And as you've heard from Tony, thousands of people joined amateur radio recently. So a lot of the preparation for this is curation, if you will, of what we're actually going to put in those streams. And sometimes we don't announce the talks until, really close up, because we are still balancing it and thinking, well, we needed an extra one on this topic or an extra one on that topic, and we're moving it around. We really hope that we get the mix right and there's something in there for everybody. And that seems to be what the way it works. So I really hope that works for everybody, but we would absolutely love to hear from people who've got suggestions about extra things we could include or things we could do, or, what is and isn't interesting to them. So there's a huge amount of work goes into the preparation, whether it's online or whether it's face-to-face. They both have a lot of preparation, but it's different. And we've got to bring the two things together.
Well, I suppose the thing that would have been missing on an online one was you wouldn't have been dazzled by the orange shirt, Steve.
Yeah, well, indeed. We normally see you come in, along the corridor. Gives us time to duck out of the way normally.
Can I just follow on from what Steve was saying about we're asking people to give us their thoughts? I know that was something that we went into the last RAGCOM for the article that I wrote about the convention in there. But also I've been following, obviously, what's been happening on social media, and a few people have made comments about the convention. A lot of people have made comments about the convention, obviously. But more recently, people have been starting to share their thoughts about they're hoping it's going to be in person next year, or they want it to be accessible, so they like it online. Obviously, everybody's got their own views. And for that, as well as the content which Steve was talking about, we are encouraging people to email us. The email address is convention@rsgb.org.uk. And for the people who think we ask these things and then we don't read what people say, that's totally untrue. I can assure you that even now I have a Word document and I'm pasting in there all of the comments that we're getting in, either through that email address or from other directions like social media, so we can see what people's feelings are and try and balance that with the practicalities of creating an event that's accessible and enjoyable for everybody next year.
Yeah, and I would say to people, if you're going to comment to Heather about something, be positive. And what I mean is, it's be positive. If you didn't like something, you say to Heather, I didn't like this because, and have you thought about doing it this way? Not just say, well, that was rubbish, so I ain't going to attend again. No. Be positive. Say, I would have preferred this or whatever. We can, well, the ICQ or Heather or the RSGB can always work with suggestions, but when people just throw a negative comment into the bucket, quite honestly, there's nothing we can do about it. We go, oh, fair enough, and move on. So you've wasted your time as much as anything. And I'm sure Heather would far prefer, even if you don't like what she's doing, she'd far prefer to know and have a sensible suggestion back than just a flippant remark thrown into a bucket.
That's absolutely true. Constructive comments are always welcome. I would say though that I am not solely responsible for the convention. That it's something that a large team of people put on, and we've had some fantastic volunteers working with us to provide the behind the scenes and in front of the scenes technical side of things. They are just brilliant to work with, a lot of fun, always very positive, very collaborative, keen to make the event the best it can be, even down to the smallest detail, and we really appreciate them very much. And I also have to say that looking at all of the feedback that we've had from the convention this year, and that includes those that have come in on the official feedback form that we were advertising during the day itself and afterwards, there hasn't really been anything negative, and that's overwhelming. Really, there are a few topics that people might have liked that we'd covered, but obviously we can't cover anything. And people are saying that they're hoping that we're going to go back to face next year. But as an event itself, it has been overwhelmingly positive, which is lovely after all the work that goes into it to try and make something the best it can be for people to enjoy.
I want to add something on the volunteers if I can, Heather. You know I would. Mm-hmm. The technical team that we work with for the convention, again this year, they worked with us last year and again this year, absolutely amazing. Sometimes they're suggesting and sort of taking ideas forward even before we've discussed them. They just, they're fantastic to work with. And if you watch the video that Heather put out, was it last week, Heather? Last weekend, I think.
Last Thursday.
What was that one called?
The Convention Unwrapped.
Unwrapped, yeah. I want to call it behind the scenes, but that was last year's one, wasn't it?
That was last year.
So that video just gives you a bit of a view of the sort of activity that goes on behind the scenes to make it all work. So what we were doing at the NRC, what was happening in let's call it a studio in Cambridge, and the one in Norwich as well, and where Jim was in Nuneaton, bringing it all together, and our remote invigilators that were not invigilators, the people that were looking after the questions, moderators. That's the word. Moderators, and all of those people, and all the volunteers at the NRC, the people running the video, running the audio, absolutely everything that came together. It's fantastic to be part of it. I absolutely loved it. And we couldn't do it without those people as well. It's brilliant. Yeah. Some of the nicest comments we had were actually from the people who spoke at the convention, who said they really appreciated the organisation that went into it, and they knew exactly what they were doing, when they were doing it. And that was brilliant, because a lot of those speakers do a lot of speaking, on a lot of events. So I take that as positive feedback from people who know what they're talking about. It was really good to hear, wasn't it, Heather?
Yeah, no, it was lovely. Yeah, they were very positive.
Yep.
Can I add a little something else there? That's how much I enjoyed speaking to people from the NRC when I was operating the radio station there. And I noticed that a number of people were disappointed they couldn't get through. I've got access to several reasonably competent stations. So if people do want to contact with GB4RS, if they send me an email, we can set up a sched, and you won't be competing with the pile-up.
Yeah, it's quite unusual to get GB4RS on the air, isn't it, Stuart? So the presidential call sign.
Yes, it's a rather...
Quite a few people have worked GB3RS from the NRC, and GB2RS for the news readers, of course. But GB4RS is a rather more rare beast, I think.
So if anyone who wants to set up a sched, or if anyone, I know I've received a couple of comments about us having to use a split station for various reasons. If anyone wants a direct single station contact with me, then just pop me an email and we'll find a time.
Yeah, well, that's an offer they can't refuse. And in fairness, all five of us are normal people. We're in the hobby because we want to be. We enjoy the hobby. That we are people you can talk to. If we're at a rally, come and say hi. It's what it's all about. And I often say to people, I'm an amateur, same as everybody else. And when you work me on air, don't be surprised. Well, don't be surprised if you actually work me, because I don't go on that often. But enjoy the hobby and talk to us, which is the important thing. Right, I'm going to start to close up now, because I think we've had some great insight from the four of you. Heather, I'm going to pass it to you first. Anything you'd like to finish up on and say?
Yes, I'd like to just highlight again the wealth of material that we have on our YouTube channel. Obviously, we've been talking specifically about the convention presentations today. But obviously, Tony's been talking about exams during this afternoon, and two of the playlists, the suites of videos we have there, are there to help new licensees or people who want to develop their skills to get the best out of their license. One of them is called Foundation Practical Skills. It does what it says on the tin, really. Everything from setting up your station through to making your first contact on various modes. And then there's another set that we created completely during lockdown, the pandemic, and they were created over Zoom, are called Useful Practical Skills. And that, again, is everything from creating a slim gym antenna through to tuning a dipole with an anode VNA, cat control, audio interface, all sorts of things. In each of them, there are 6 videos. And we've had about 25,000 views of those. Really positive comments. People are coming across them for the first time as they pass their license. So those are just another example of what we have on our YouTube channel. And I know from... Sorry.
I'd like to sort of chip in at this point, if I may, because that was another thing that inevitably had to change due to the COVID restrictions, is that we had to suspend the practical assessments, which were originally part of the foundation course. And these videos certainly sort of filled the gap from that. But going forward, as many people will now be aware from a recent announcement, the practicals are essentially permanently suspended, or at least as they were described in the syllabus, the mandatory practical assessments. That was so that essentially the mandatory practical assessments were incompatible with the sort of distance learning and online examination process, which was so successful. And as they were not essentially a requirement of the regulator, we've decided, the ESC decided to end those for the time being. But that said, amateur radio is by its very nature a very practical hobby, and that's where certainly those videos step in and say fill the gap. I would say that although we have essentially ended the mandatory practical assessments, clubs and trainers are strong. I mean, we're not banned practical. We're far from it. As I say, that would be totally crazy in a hobby like amateur radio. But clubs and trainers are certainly encouraged to use practicals as a way of illustrating the theory in the syllabus, and certainly those practicals that are in section 10 of the syllabus, which are no longer mandatory, can certainly be used. And I think that's a value added that the face-to-face training in clubs can offer to give people a sort of practical hands-on training. So that will go. Well, certainly the exams groups will be looking at practicals in future and seeing if there's a need or desire to have some sort of practical assessment, which would be would have to be compatible with distance learning. But that's another matter, and that's down the line in future syllabus reviews. But just wanted to make that point that although we had ended effectively the practical assessments, we strongly encourage clubs, trainers to use practicals as a way of helping the learning and getting that putting across that practical sort of aspect of the hobby, which is all important.
Absolutely, and as Tony says, that the practical skills videos are linked with are very helpful to people who haven't been able to have practical help as they've done the license training over the last 18 months, but hopefully going forward as well. But that's just one example of the hundreds and hundreds of things that we've got on YouTube. And one of the things that I noticed when I did the analytics after the convention was the several hundred people who joined us live for our convention. It was the first time they'd ever visited our YouTube channel. And so I would encourage you, if you've enjoyed the convention, if you've enjoyed those practical videos, if you've enjoyed any of the other videos that you were then pointed towards via YouTube on that channel, please subscribe. Because every month we add something new. We have our Tonight at 8 live webinar on different topics. And if you subscribe to the channel, you'll get notification when a live event is there counting down, or we upload a new video, as I did on Thursday evening for the Convention Unwrapped. So if you want to be first to know of the things that we're putting up there, then subscribe and enjoy the wealth of what we provide.
Yeah, that's great, Heather. That's great. Right, I'm now going to pass it to Stuart and Steve. Stuart, though, go first, because us M1s, Steve and me are M1s, and we go a long way. So over to you, Stuart.
Okay, well, thank you very much for taking your time to talk to us today, Martin. I would like to reiterate what I said at the beginning, that we need to move amateur radio forward. So if people have good ideas about what they could do to make amateur radio attractive to younger people, to new people, to people who aren't currently radio amateurs but are part of the technical or even non-technical community, then please talk to us. We're completely open to considering any practical idea or even some slightly impractical ideas for how we can make amateur radio a better and more fulfilling activity.
That's great. That's great, Stuart. Steve, final words on the topic?
Well, as always, I want to welcome all of the people that have joined amateur radio in the last 18 months, 2 years maybe. And we've seen thousands of people, as you've heard today, joining amateur radio for the first time. We've also seen hundreds of people coming back to amateur radio that have been interested in the past. That's fantastic. I love that as well. I've told you that before, Martin. I love both of those groups of people coming to amateur radio. I still see on social media people saying, oh, amateur radio is declining and things like that. And I just want to say again that the amateur radio has seen a real growth in the UK in the last 18 months. Now, we know there's some very good reasons for that, but we've reacted to those circumstances, and amateur radio has then been allowed to grow. So it is immensely positive. You know, I look at this from a business point of view with the RSGB as well as a purely amateur radio view. You know that, Martin. And the membership of the RSGB is at the highest it's been for 10 years, right? And we've seen new people coming in, we've seen people coming back. That has had not everybody joins the RSGB. Obviously, we love it when they do. But, out of those people, there are a significant number that have been joining the RSGB as well, which makes us stronger when we represent amateur radio in the UK to Ofcom, within the IARU, internationally. And everything that we do, it gives us a stronger voice. But there are more people in amateur radio willing to help those newcomers, and they're attracting more people. And it is just fantastic to see. And I would just want to encourage everybody to welcome all those new amateurs, do everything they can to help them join the community, make them part of the amateur radio community, and join everything that we do and everything that we really enjoy doing.
I agree 100% with you, Steve. And I'll put one last thing in on this. If somebody has an M7, a foundation license holder, that might only be what they want to get. Well, they could be a very, very clever person. And when I was working as a support engineer with a salesman many, many moons ago, he used to say to me, "You got one mouth and two ears. Listen twice as much as you talk." So don't dispel anybody that starts to tell you something, because they might be the Elmer for you. You can't be Elmer in everything. So that's my last words on that subject.
Oh, I have some absolutely fantastic conversations with people that phone up or email, or and you never know where it's going to come from. I definitely miss that from the convention and the Hamfest and all the face-to-face things. But I still have some fantastic conversations with people, and there is an enormous wealth of knowledge and skill and enthusiasm out there. Sometimes it gets drowned, below the problems and the complaining and things like that. But there is a huge number of people that absolutely love love amateur radio, and we're doing everything we can to support them. And it's an amazing hobby, pastime, experience. It really is.
Well, that's great. Well, all that's left for me to do is thank the four of you for joining me today. I'd like to thank Heather Parsons, the Communications Manager from the RSGB.
Thanks, Martin. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, great. I'd like to thank Steve Thomas, the Commercial Manager.
General Manager.
General Manager. Let's get it right. I'd like to thank Mr. Steve Thomas, the General Manager of the RSGB. I'd also like to thank Mr. Stuart Bryant, who is the President of the RSGB at the moment.
Thank you, Martin.
And last but not least, I left you last again, Tony, sorry, but Mr. Tony Kent, who is the Examination Standards Committee Chairperson. So thanks, guys, for joining.
Thanks, Martin.
Yeah, and 73 is all, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you. 73.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, everybody, a bumper show there for you, and I really hope you've appreciated not only our wonderful dissection of the news over the last fortnight in amateur radio, but also the feedback there from our chat with the RSGB. Certainly lots of content there for everybody to enjoy, and as I say, not just UK-centric, but certainly things that would generate interest across our hobby. So I really hope you guys appreciated the chat there we had. Now, as always, we really do appreciate your feedback here at the ICQ podcast. We'd like to thank Tony Street, Golf Zero, Charlie Yankee India for getting in contact with us. And he's letting us know a couple of things. That the Essex CW Bootcamp now has a new website on a different domain name. So that new website is Essex CW. So it's spelled Echo Sierra Sierra, Echo X-Ray Charlie Whiskey. .org.uk, so you can check that out there if you want to join their CW Bootcamp. And then the other thing to let you know is they've unfortunately had to cancel their rally in February, and as I say, really just down to the uncertainty of the economic market with the traders, etc. So they're going to look at a date in the summer, hoping obviously that things come back to some sense of normality. So as I say, Tony, hope the guys there in Essex that you're all well, you're all safe, enjoying the hobby as always, and certainly let us know if you can get that date replanned in for the later on in the summer of 2022. So I really hope they get that on board. Right then, I know we've been working hard with the digital group and doing some upgrades on that over the last couple of weeks. And as I say, it looks like, fingers crossed, we'll be across onto new infrastructure, hopefully by the end of the month. And then we can announce when we'll do our next digital talk group.
Certainly is, Colin. Most of the infrastructure work is completed now. We've still a few bits of testing to go, but most of moving it into the new infrastructure's been done. Hopefully users haven't suffered too much. I know there's been a few short outages and a few strange things at times. What I will say is, and this is definite, is if you are running with a Pi-Star software on your hotspot, please make sure you update it regularly. The other thing is, and I'm talking to Adrian, he renamed the talk group. So if you've got it in as YSF 09480 ICQ podcast, when you do an update, you'll lose that. It's still YSF 09480, but Adrian's renamed it to ICQ Digital GRP for Group. So yeah, if you're saving it as your default, so your hotspot always comes up with the ICQ podcast, just be aware that when you do an update, it might need redoing. Apart from that, the talk group's doing really well. I usually say don't blip it, and I know people do. If you're going to blip it, please blip it for more than a second. I'm seeing people blipping, say, the YSF group, but people on Brandmeister and people on D-Star don't get the feed through because it's not long enough for the information to work its way through the system. So if you want to be spotted by other people on different modes, at least give it a minute, at least give it a second or two, so that your call sign will register in all of the modes. But apart from that, I think it's going pretty well again, Colin.
Yeah, fantastic. As I say, I'm looking forward to when we can hopefully announce that next good chat with our listeners. As I say, we've got a date in mind, but we just want to make sure the new infrastructure holds up, and as I say, it's all transferred over before we go and do that. So we'll hopefully announce that in the next show. In the meantime, if we can announce it beforehand, anybody on the newsletters will certainly be updated on that release, and as I say, we can certainly let you guys know from there. Now, as always, it's our very kind donors that, as I say, keeps this show advert free. And as I say, make sure that you've got over this episode, probably about a good 2.5 hours worth of content advert free. So we'd like to thank Winston, KD2, Whiskey Lima Lima, and Theodore, KU9, Charlie Papa Delta for their very kind support with the ICQ podcast. You can do exactly what they did by showing the value you find in the show. It's a very, very simple process. We don't ask you to put for certain amounts of money. What we ask you to do is think about the value you got from the show, turn that into a monetary value, and then visit icqpodcast.com/donate. And there are some options there which might meet your needs, but certainly there are lots of ways of getting involved at a value that you find in the show. And the most important thing is anything and everything you send our way helps us pay our way, helps us continue to invest in things like the digital group, and helps us obviously make a better show for everybody. So we really like you to think of us, and as I say, send whatever you find value in the show our way by visiting that web link. Right, well, we'd also like to thank Chris, Mike 0, Tango Charlie Hotel, Martin, Mike 0, Sierra Golf Lima, Frank, Kilo 4, Foxtrot Mike Hotel, and Bill, Whiskey Charlie 3, Bravo, for taking part in the news round table. Thanks a lot, guys, for taking part. And also many thanks well to the RSGB guys as well for joining us with their chat as well with us. And as I hope everyone got some interest from there. Right, well, that just about sums up everything, I think, for this show. And I say now, the most important thing now is hopefully you've been to the shops this week, Dad, and brought a nice biscuit or two, and made sure there's some tea bags to make Mrs. B a cup of tea.
Certainly will, Colin. Your mum and me are going to have a cup of tea in a minute. I'll find your mum a nice chocolate biscuit. And like you said, it was great meeting up with the guys from the RSGB again. It's been a long summer. We've all been busy. And they had some very, very interesting things to say, I believe. And I enjoyed the whole thing. So I hope our listeners enjoy that one, Colin.
And I've also, right, well, I'll bid 73s to everybody. And as I say, guys, continue to enjoy the hobby. And we'll look forward to catching you in a fortnight's time. 73s all.
Yeah, 73.